Have you ever noticed how a single glance can shatter years of careful pretending? How one person walking into a room can expose every lie you have been telling yourself about who you think you are supposed to be. It happens in an instant, like lightning splitting the sky on a clear day, illuminating a landscape you never knew existed even though you have been walking through it your entire life. Last Tuesday, while sitting in that coffee shop where you always sit when you need to disappear from the world for an hour, you saw her. Not just looked, but saw. The way you see a comet streaking across the darkness, rare and brilliant and impossible to ignore. And in that moment of recognition, something inside your chest cracked open like an ancient door you had forgotten you ever locked, letting in air so pure and strange that you remembered what it felt like to breathe for the first time in years. She was reading something that made her smile. Not the polite smile you wear at meetings or family dinners, but the kind of smile that comes from some secret place where wonder still lives, where curiosity has not been murdered by disappointment, where the heart still believes that magic is not just a word people use to sell things to children. You could not see what she was reading, but you could see how it changed her face, how it made her look like someone who knew secrets about existence that you had spent decades trying to remember, someone who carried light in the same places where you carried shadows, someone who had figured out how to remain soft in a world designed to make everyone hard and defensive and afraid of their own depths. The moment your eyes met, you felt something you had not felt since you were 7 years old and discovered that books could transport you to worlds more real than the one you lived in every day. It was recognition without introduction, understanding without explanation, the sudden knowing that here was another person who had been hiding the same impossible longing you had been carrying around like a stone in your chest, pretending it was not there because acknowledging it would mean admitting that everything you had built your life around was somehow not enough, could never be enough, would always leave you hungry for something that had no name in any language you had learned to speak. This is exactly what Mircea Eliade understood about the sacred dimension of human existence, about how the deepest truths reveal themselves not through books or lectures or philosophical arguments, but through encounters that pierce straight through the careful armor we have constructed to protect ourselves from the overwhelming reality of what we actually are beneath all our roles and responsibilities and socially acceptable personas. Eliade spent his life studying what he called hierophanies, those moments when the sacred breaks through the ordinary world like morning sun, piercing through heavy curtains, transforming everything it touches from common into luminous, from mundane into miraculous, from forgotten into unforgettable, Have you ever noticed how a single glance can shatter years of careful pretending? How one person walking into a room can expose every lie you have been telling yourself about who you think you are supposed to be. It happens in an instant, like lightning splitting the sky on a clear day, illuminating a landscape you never knew existed even though you have been walking through it your entire life. Last Tuesday, while sitting in that coffee shop where you always sit when you need to disappear from the world for an hour, you saw her. Not just looked, but saw. The way you see a comet streaking across the darkness, rare and brilliant and impossible to ignore. And in that moment of recognition, something inside your chest cracked open like an ancient door you had forgotten you ever locked, letting in air so pure and strange that you remembered what it felt like to breathe for the first time in years. She was reading something that made her smile. Not the polite smile you wear at meetings or family dinners, but the kind of smile that comes from some secret place where wonder still lives, where curiosity has not been murdered by disappointment, where the heart still believes that magic is not just a word people use to sell things to children. You could not see what she was reading, but you could see how it changed her face, how it made her look like someone who knew secrets about existence that you had spent decades trying to remember, someone who carried light in the same places where you carried shadows, someone who had figured out how to remain soft in a world designed to make everyone hard and defensive and afraid of their own depths. The moment your eyes met, you felt something you had not felt since you were 7 years old and discovered that books could transport you to worlds more real than the one you lived in every day. It was recognition without introduction, understanding without explanation, the sudden knowing that here was another person who had been hiding the same impossible longing you had been carrying around like a stone in your chest, pretending it was not there because acknowledging it would mean admitting that everything you had built your life around was somehow not enough, could never be enough, would always leave you hungry for something that had no name in any language you had learned to speak. This is exactly what Mircea Eliade understood about the sacred dimension of human existence, about how the deepest truths reveal themselves not through books or lectures or philosophical arguments, but through encounters that pierce straight through the careful armor we have constructed to protect ourselves from the overwhelming reality of what we actually are beneath all our roles and responsibilities and socially acceptable personas. Eliade spent his life studying what he called hierophanies, those moments when the sacred breaks through the ordinary world like morning sun, piercing through heavy curtains, transforming everything it touches from common into luminous, from mundane into miraculous, from forgotten into unforgettable, to when someone enters your life and awakens what you have been struggling to hide, you are experiencing the most intimate form of hierophany possible, a manifestation of the sacred that happens not in temples or churches or meditation retreats, but in the dangerous and beautiful space between two souls who recognize each other across the vast loneliness of modern existence. She becomes a living reminder that you are not crazy for feeling that there has to be more to life than the endless accumulation of things and achievements and social media validation, that the emptiness you carry is not a personal failure, but a spiritual hunger that can only be fed by genuine connection with something greater than your small, frightened ego. What you have been struggling to hide is not weakness or inadequacy or some shameful secret that would destroy your carefully constructed reputation if anyone discovered it. What you have been hiding is the mystic, the dreamer, the part of yourself that still believes in beauty and meaning and transcendence even though the world has taught you that such beliefs are naive and impractical and embarrassing. You have been hiding your capacity for wonder, your need for depth, your longing to touch something eternal through the temporary vehicle of human relationship. You have been hiding your homo religiosus, that part of yourself that knows, without knowing how it knows, that existence itself is sacred, that consciousness is a miracle, that love is the force that holds the universe together. In our secular age, where science has supposedly explained away all the mysteries and technology has promised to solve all the problems, the man who still hears the whisper of eternity in quiet moments feels like a refugee from another century, someone whose deepest truths make him vulnerable to ridicule and misunderstanding. The culture tells him that matter is all there is, that consciousness is just a chemical reaction, that love is just biology, that meaning is just a story we tell ourselves to avoid facing the harsh reality of our cosmic insignificance. So he learns to speak the language of cynicism and materialism, while the poet and prophet within him slowly suffocates under layers of learned appropriate behavior. But when the right person walks into your life, someone who carries her own hidden fire, someone who has also been pretending that the sacred is not real because it is easier to survive in a desacralized world if you can convince yourself that nothing is holy, suddenly all the careful walls you have built begin to tremble. She does not have to say anything profound or do anything extraordinary. Her very presence is enough to remind you that there are still people walking on this earth who know that reality has depths that cannot be measured by any instrument science has invented, who understand that the most important conversations happen in the silence between words, who remember that the human heart was designed for infinities that make all our small concerns seem like shadows dancing on the cave wall. The recognition that passes between you in that first moment of authentic seeing is not romantic in the shallow sense that our culture understands romance, but archetypal, mythological, touching something so deep in the human experience that every culture in history has created stories and rituals and sacred texts to honor it. You are not just two individuals attracted to each other, but two expressions of the eternal human search for connection with the transcendent, two pilgrims who have found each other on the long road toward remembering what it means to be fully alive in a world that seems designed to keep everyone half asleep. Eliade would say that such encounters transport you into sacred time, that cyclical, eternal dimension where past and future collapse into an eternal now pregnant with infinite possibility. This is why certain conversations feel like they could last forever, why hours can disappear like minutes when you are in the presence of someone who really sees you, why the ordinary world seems to fade into the background when you encounter someone who calls forth your truest self. You are not just talking to another person but communing with the sacred principle that expresses itself through human relationship, touching something eternal through the vehicle of temporal encounter. You know what touches me most when I read your messages? It is realizing that we are not alone in this search. If you are listening to me now and feel that emptiness, that sensation that something important is missing in your life, I want you to know that I understand exactly what you are going through. There were moments when I also felt completely disconnected from the sacred, lost in the midst of a routine that seemed to suck all the magic out of existence. That is why I want to ask you a very direct question. What was the last moment you felt there was something greater than yourself present in your life? It could have been contemplating a sunset, listening to music, or simply in an instant of silence. If you feel comfortable, write in the comments, "I miss the sacred in my daily life," and briefly tell when that last moment was. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to read today to feel less alone in this journey. And I promise I will read each comment with the care it deserves. The awakening that comes through authentic encounter is never just personal, but always transformative in ways that ripple out into every aspect of your existence. When someone sees through your masks and recognizes the sacred fire burning behind your eyes, you cannot go back to pretending that you are just your job title, just your social security number, just another consumer in the marketplace of modern alienation. You begin to remember that you are a spiritual being having a temporary human experience, not a human being occasionally having spiritual moments that you have to hide or apologize for or explain away to people who have forgotten their own divine nature. This remembering is often painful at first because it means acknowledging how much of your life you have been living as a stranger to yourself, how many years you have wasted trying to be what others expected you to be, rather than what you truly were. It means facing the grief of all the authentic moments you postponed, all the real conversations you avoided, all the deep connections you sacrificed on the altar of social acceptability and professional advancement. But it also brings with it a fierce joy, the wild happiness that comes from finally being able to breathe freely after years of holding your breath, finally being able to speak your truth after years of diplomatic silence. The woman who awakens what you have been hiding becomes a mirror in which you see not just who you are, but who you have the potential to become when you stop apologizing for the depth of your longing and the intensity of your need for meaning. She shows you simply by being herself without apology or explanation that it is possible to live with an open heart in a closed world, to maintain wonder in the face of cynicism, to keep the sacred fire burning even when everything around you seems designed to extinguish it. Her very existence becomes proof that the homo religiosus is not extinct, that there are still people who know how to read the signs and symbols that speak of realities beyond the purely material. Eliade understood that sacred space is not just geographical, but psychological, not just temples and shrines, but states of consciousness where the infinite breaks through into the finite, where ordinary awareness is transformed by contact with something greater than itself. When two people meet each other at the level of their deepest truth, they create together a sacred space, a sanctuary where authenticity becomes possible, where the masks can finally fall away, where what remains is the recognition of shared participation in the mystery that underlies all existence. This is why certain encounters feel like coming home to yourself, why certain people can speak to parts of you that have been silent for decades, why love in its truest form is always a form of recognition rather than discovery. You are not learning something entirely new about yourself, but remembering something that has always been true, something that got buried under years of being told that practicality was more important than passion, that security was more valuable than authenticity, that fitting in was safer than standing out as someone who still believes that existence itself is a miracle worthy of wonder and reverence. The transformation that happens through such encounters follows what Eliade called the pattern of death and rebirth that marks all genuine spiritual initiation. The old self, the one who believed that survival required hiding your light under a bushel, must die so that the new self, the one who is willing to risk everything for the sake of authentic living, can be born. This dying is rarely dramatic or sudden, but more like the slow melting of ice in spring sunshine, a gradual thawing of defenses that have been frozen in place for so long you had forgotten they were not permanent features of your landscape. As the ice melts, you begin to remember what it felt like to be curious instead of cautious, to be vulnerable instead of invulnerable, to be open to possibility instead of closed to disappointment. You remember that the heart is not a fortress to be defended but a garden to be cultivated, that love is not a resource to be hoarded but an energy to be shared, that meaning is not something you find but something you create through the quality of attention you bring to each moment of your irreplaceable existence. The memory of such an encounter becomes a treasured sanctuary within the heart, a place to return to when the world grows dark and cynical, when the noise of ordinary life threatens to drown out the quiet voice of the soul. Like a secret garden that blooms regardless of the seasons, the awareness she awakened continues to grow and deepen, even when she is no longer physically present, because what was awakened was not dependent on her continued presence, but on the remembering of what was always true, the recognition of what was always there waiting to be acknowledged and honored. This is perhaps the greatest gift that such encounters offer. They prove that the sacred is not dead, that wonder is still possible, that there are still people in this world who know how to see beyond the surface of things to the luminous reality that pulses beneath all appearances. They remind you that you are not alone in your longing for depth and meaning and authentic connection, that there are others who share your hunger for something more than the endless distractions and superficial pleasures that our culture offers as substitutes for genuine nourishment of the soul. If you have ever wondered why you feel most alive when you are with certain people, why some conversations leave you feeling like you have been drinking from a well you did not know existed, why certain presences can transform an ordinary room into a sanctuary simply by entering it, you are experiencing what the ancient traditions have always known, that the sacred is not a thing or a place, but a quality of relationship, a way of meeting the world that transforms both the perceiver and the perceived. The woman who awakens what you have been hiding is not doing something to you but with you, creating together a space where the deepest truths can finally be spoken, where the most careful masks can finally be removed. When someone impacts your life at this level, when their very presence calls forth aspects of yourself that you had forgotten existed, you begin to understand what Eliade meant when he wrote about the eternal return, the cyclical nature of sacred time that allows for endless renewal and rebirth. You are not the same person after such an encounter, because you have been reminded of dimensions of yourself that extend far beyond the narrow identity you had constructed to navigate the profane world. You discover that you are larger than your job description, deeper than your social media profile, more mysterious than your resume could ever capture, more luminous than any photograph could ever reveal. This awakening often brings with it a kind of divine homesickness, a longing for a state of being that feels both completely new and utterly familiar, like remembering a dream you had forgotten you ever dreamed. Eliade called this nostalgia for paradise, the deep human intuition that we once lived in a more integrated relationship with the sacred, and that this integration is still possible, still calling to us through moments of beauty and connection and authentic encounter. The woman who awakens your hidden depths becomes a living reminder that paradise is not a place you go to, but a way of being you can return to, not through escape from the world, but through deeper engagement with its sacred dimensions. The modern world tries to convince us that such experiences are illusions, that the sense of profound connection and recognition we feel in certain encounters is just biology trying to trick us into reproduction, just neurons firing in patterns that evolution programmed to ensure survival of the species. But Eliade would say that this reductive explanation misses the point entirely, that it confuses the mechanism with the meaning, the how with the why, the surface with the depth. Yes, there may be biological and psychological factors at play, but that does not diminish the spiritual significance of what happens when two souls recognize each other across the vast loneliness of existence. In fact, Eliade would argue that the biological and spiritual dimensions of such encounters are not separate, but interwoven, that the sacred expresses itself through the natural world rather than in opposition to it, that the body is not a prison for the soul, but a temple where the infinite can take finite form. When someone awakens what you have been hiding, they are activating not just psychological or emotional responses, but the deepest spiritual capacities of your being, calling forth the part of yourself that knows how to commune with mystery, how to touch eternity through time, how to find the infinite within the intimate. The real tragedy of our age is not that people fall in love and sometimes get their hearts broken, but that so many people go through life without ever experiencing this level of recognition, without ever meeting someone who sees through their carefully constructed personas to the sacred fire burning within. They live and die as strangers to themselves, never knowing the joy of being truly seen, never experiencing the profound relief that comes when someone looks into your eyes and recognizes the light you have been hiding there, never learning that love is not something you earn but something you are, not something you do but something you remember how to be. But for those who are fortunate enough to experience such encounters, who meet someone who awakens what they have been struggling to hide, life becomes an entirely different adventure. They discover that reality has layers and dimensions they never suspected, that consciousness is far more mysterious and magical than any textbook ever hinted, that the universe is not a cold, mechanical process but a living, breathing, conscious expression of love, learning to know itself through countless forms and relationships and moments of recognition between souls who have never really been separate. If you have made it this far, it is because something inside you recognizes that there is a different path, a deeper way to understand your own spiritual journey. I know what it is like to feel lost amid so much noise of the modern world, seeking answers that always seem to slip through your fingers. That is why I created this space, this refuge where we can explore together the ancient wisdom that still pulses alive in our hearts. When you subscribe to this channel, you are not just clicking a button, you are joining a community of people who, like you, feel that life has deeper layers waiting to be discovered. Here you will find not just knowledge, but genuine embrace for your thirst for meaning. Subscribe now and be part of this journey of rediscovering the sacred in everyday life. Your soul deserves this gift. The invitation that such encounters extend is not just to romantic love in the conventional sense, but to a complete reorientation of how you understand yourself and your place in the cosmic story. You begin to see that you are not an accident in a meaningless universe, but a unique and irreplaceable expression of the same creative force that shapes galaxies and grows flowers and draws souls together in moments of recognition that feel like coming home after a long exile in a foreign land. You realize that what you have been hiding is not your weakness but your greatest strength, not your shame but your glory, not your burden but your gift to a world that desperately needs people who remember how to see with the eyes of the heart.